Rob would have loved this place. He's a good man. The best of us.
You know, they have walking trails in England. Pubs.
Come on, man. Where's your soul?
It's twisted. It's twisted.
All right, yep.
Easy.
Look, we go southwest through here. We cut the journey in half.
What, through the forest?
Yeah, why not?
We should have gone to Vegas.
Oh, you'd have found something to fall over in Vegas too, mate. Now, is it me, or is it really quiet in here?
Good evening, Terry. I own a motel not too far from here, and you'd be welcome to spend the night in one of the empty rooms if you'd like.
It burns! Oh, it burns! And I'm the devil.
It's my great honor and privilege to welcome back to the Necronomicast, Mr. David Bruckner.
Hello, sir.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Good, man. So yeah, you're an alum of the Necronomicast. You were featured back in episode 126 about 2 years ago with your contribution for the movie Southbound. And now I'm super excited to have you back on the show because we're going to be talking about your first full-length feature film, The Ritual, which debuted just a few days ago on Netflix. So I don't even know where to begin because it's a crazy movie, man. Congratulations.
That's the idea. Yeah. Thanks, Brian.
So, so like last time we had you on the show, you were getting ready to talk about Southbound, your contribution to that anthology, which was fantastic. And then you had a couple things that you were kind of working on. You could talk about some you couldn't talk about, something about Crystal Lake, and then things didn't go down the way we thought they were going to go. And now, Indeed, that's right. But now we're talking about 2018. And I've been a big fan of yours with Southbound and with, of course, VHS. And then I went back and researched The Signal. So now your first full-length movie. Can you kind of talk about a little bit about the journey, what it was to go to your first film, and how did all that come together and piece together for you?
Well, as usual, I had, 3 or 4 different plates spinning, things I was trying to make happen. I had a script I had co-written with Nick Dukowski, who I wrote VHS with, that is still alive and well, that was financed and kind of spinning as they do for a moment. And it was as if the universe just presented to me this amazing eject button that was, if that thing wasn't going to go, or if one of the other things wasn't going to necessarily go to camera anytime soon, I could just press this button and just go make this crazy movie with this production company in London. And I had been talking to Will Tennant, who works for the Imaginarium Studios over there, which is Jonathan Cavendish and Andy Serkis's production company. And they had this book by Adam Nevill that they had optioned, and they had worked a few drafts with this writer, Joe Barton, and wanted to know what I thought. And I read it, and I thought it was completely bug nuts and awesome. And I went and read the book, and I fell head over heels in love with the whole project. And I thought it was a challenging thing to adapt, and they had made some really interesting discoveries and developments. And so I left. And next thing I knew, I was in London, and we had about a month and a half of casting and scouting and doing some rewrites, and we scouted various locations all around Eastern Europe because the movie takes place in Sweden, but there wasn't the budget to shoot in Sweden. And we settled on this amazing place in Romania, and then prep began, and 5 weeks later, we were rolling in the woods.
Wow, that fast, huh?
It was pretty fast. Yeah, it was pretty fast. It was definitely, I think start to finish, from the moment they said, come do this, to the moment I returned to Los Angeles was about 11 months.
Amazing.
That's post and everything, yeah.
So I'm curious, I've read a couple things from Adam Nevill. I subscribed or belonged to his website, so I got a free ebook, and I went to that website because of your involvement and everything I was hearing about the ritual. So I'm curious though, what was like when you first read this script, which was an adaptation of the book? What was it that jumped off, in your mind? Like what made you, adhere to this project? Like what jumped out at you?
I mean, I think first and foremost, I related to some of the struggles that the characters were experiencing. Mm-hmm. And particularly the way the book is able to go in greater depth with that. It was, men that had been old friends that had known each other since they were in college. And here they were in this absurd survival predicament in the middle of the wilderness. And all these insecurities amongst themselves were sort of bubbling to the surface. And I just thought it was really fresh to have grown men on an adventure tale with adventure horror, with a Nordic flavor. And I really related to the group. I related a lot to the idea that people change over time, and that maybe who was kind of the alpha character when they were younger maybe didn't necessarily hold the respect of his peers anymore, and he could feel it, and that was something that was very palpable in the novel. I felt a certain resentment where Luke's character was concerned because his friends didn't maybe look up to the way his life had gone, and he was very angry and was lashing out in this situation as they're all trying to cope with the fact that something may or may not be following them. And I just thought it was all really, really fresh and really compelling. And it was a classic monster movie and a classic structure. And I think I just liked the idea of leaning into that and owning it, and embracing it.
Yeah, I when you were talking, I was kind of thinking one of the things that drew me to it was the fact that I'm 43 and the rest of the guys, the other co-hosts on the show, are about the same age. We're all in our early 40s, whatnot. And we're kind of coming to that point of our lives where we do have our college friends and we had our adventures back in the day. But, things change, I have a wife and a couple children. There's other children on the show, and why, we have our adult perspective now. And these guys, you could tell that they were like college buddies. Maybe they lived in the dorms together. Maybe they went on spring breaks and things like, pub crawls like they're talking about. And now they're older and they're talking about their wives, their children, this kind of thing. And they still want to kind of go off on this adventure, but they're obviously changed. And that's one thing that kind of struck me is like, this is a movie about, people in my kind of perspective, my era. And so that kind of drew me in too, because we don't see a lot of movies about guys. I don't know how old you are, but we don't see a lot of movies geared toward fellas my age.
Yeah. No, it was, I'm a bit younger, but not much. And it was, that was actually surprisingly refreshing in a sense. And it's actually, I found in a sense, it's just harder to make it scary because they're not as vulnerable sometimes. You sometimes will talk to horror filmmakers and they'll say, why always female as the lead? And sometimes it does boil down to a certain basic physical vulnerability or something. But with the guys, it had to be a psychological vulnerability, because I think we're programmed to be a little bit more okay with seeing, a man go through hell or seeing him literally eviscerated hanging from a tree. It just has less of an impact in a sense. So we had to kind of worm around in their insecurities a little bit and understand how that works. And one of the most interesting things about the book to me was just the way they pushed off of each other and, the things they didn't say to one another, the things they had a hard time talking about. And we tried to find that stuff in the script. I love probably my favorite beat in the whole movie is the moment after the nightmare where Phil is tying his shoes and him and Luke make eye contact. And it's like, what is the feeling after this series of nightmares where we've pissed ourselves and, Phil, you're naked praying to this goddamn idol in the attic? Like, where are we all at? We feel shame. It's a moment of shame. We've been completely all of our security systems have sort of fallen apart in this moment.
Yeah, they're they're totally brought low after that moment. Another thing too, like I like the whole arc of Luke throughout the movie, because I don't know what the intention was, like with the whole, and listeners, if you haven't seen the movie yet, we're going to spoil a couple things, but we got the director on the line here. We're going to talk to him about some stuff. When Luke and Robert have that moment in the alley before they go into the liquor store, there's almost like Luke kind of like looking at him like, I'm going to go in for a bottle. Do you want to go in with me? So I don't know if Luke had a problem, if maybe I'm reading too much into it, like Luke had maybe a problem with alcohol or something like that. And Robert was kind of like somebody he felt safe with, because he kind of, he picks on Robert to go in with him into the liquor store to get that bottle of vodka.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always thought it was, Luke was the rowdy one when they were younger. And he was the one that was the life of the party. And you can, hopefully here you can feel these guys have grown up. It's a school night. And I always imagine in that moment, it's that Luke still has a little bit, or thinks he has a little bit of alpha dominance. So he picks out the one guy that he can still control and steer. And he pulls Robert in, and Robert goes reluctantly, because it's easier to just go along with it than to argue with Luke's ego in a sense.
Sure.
And, and then he's in the store, and you can feel Robert kind of clawing back a little bit, because Luke wants to talk shit about Dom when Dom's not around. And Robert's not quite having it. And, and then it all comes down to the wedding ring and everything else. And you just get the sense that Luke is stunted. And we talked a good deal about, how much is that related to alcohol? Do we want to lean into that in a sense, or is it just enough that it's kind of around in a sense? But yeah, that definitely factored.
Yeah, and the whole scene, the beat you were talking about earlier, but I like the one where, well, I don't mean but I mean it resonated, like when Robert looks back over at Luke when they're talking about when the robbers are wanting the wedding ring, and Luke's got that, he shakes his head and he's like, no. And it was that like Luke's alpha male kind of like, no, don't give in. That was a little something Rafe gave us that we talked a bit about in the edit room, actually. And, I think what I was reading from him there was, he didn't want to hold eye contact because he wasn't sure he could stand up in that moment. Oh,
but to each his own. Yeah, totally. Maybe he's saying, don't
give up your wedding ring.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I feel, I guess I would have thought Luke would have maybe not seen the value in that, but yeah, to each his own.
Yeah. Well, the way I see it, I'm a happily married guy. And if I was ever in a situation like that, a pawn shop owner might look at your ring and think it's worth $30, but to you, it's like 17 years or however many years of investment you have. And just like, don't give up your ring. So I felt that was kind of a powerful kind of a part of the film. And then, Robert gets clocked in the head, and that's, that starts off the rest of the movie. And with these characters that we're talking about, man, you've been blessed. Going back to VHS, Signal, Southbound, especially too, with the lead in your bit with Southbound, you've been blessed with really fine actors. I mean, every one of these guys holds their own. They are great actors. Do you have a say in the casting when it's a shot or a shoot off in Romania, or do you walk in with a lot of that already picked out?
Oh yeah, no, that's probably, those are the most important decisions in my job.
Yeah.
I think I have learned that if it works out on that level, then you're kind of halfway there in a sense. And we were very fortunate to get Rafe, and Rafe came on board, and being as a British production, he brought with him enough energy and confidence for them to kind of guarantee the financing. And he was, by the way, he was our first choice too. So when the casting director had laid out a bunch of kind of British actors to me, and we talked through some different names, and I went off to watch a bunch of stuff, and I was familiar with Rafe's work, but I went and watched some other stuff. We put him as our number one, and he was out in LA at the time working on a show, and I sat down and met with him, and we talked through some stuff and shared some sensibilities, and the script was at an earlier stage at that point. And he probably took what was a huge leap of faith. You know, I mean, I think about it for an actor in his position to just agree, you know, to go make this crazy monster movie, Swedish British monster movie in the middle of the forest is to I mean, it's a great leap of faith. He doesn't. I mean, how does he know what he's getting into? And so, yeah. But we hit it off, talked through it, and then once he was on board, I sat down with Julie Harkin, and we started looking at a whole bunch of actors. And having a great casting director, she just would bring in. I mean, everybody she brought in was solid, had an amazing contribution, and so then it becomes a question of, well, who are these guys and what do they bring to the table? And every single actor is gonna be an entirely different movie, just the way they bounce off of each other. And so we were doing a pass on the script while we were doing room reads with these guys. So I would bring in Sam Troughton and Robert James Collier and Arsher Ali, and I would read them together, and I'd read them with some of the other actors that we worked with. And I think I brought Sam back 3 times. Yeah, and so that was sort of a testing ground for us to try out the dialogue and the banter, but also to figure out what the dynamics are with the group. And, you know, we knew Rafe had this, he's got an inherent sense of dominance and leadership to him, you know, and so it was really interesting to me to make a movie where you have a character that fails on that level, that sort of shows his feathers early on, and then he's no longer in charge, and he's lost the respect of his friends, which was the movie's way of distilling these conflicts down into something manageable for the cinema, because that wasn't the opening convenience store stuff wasn't in the book. And then the other guys, you know, we had something we wanted to get from each of them. You know, Phil Arsher Ali has a comic sensibility where he can sit right above any situation. You know, he can just throw out a quip and sort of make himself invincible in that arena. And it's like, I wanted to have a character like that was sort of impenetrable in a sense, that never made himself vulnerable, to be the guy that you find naked praying to the idol. We wanted to break Phil. And then Hutch, we really wanted to play against type. And because the simple read on Hutch was that he was this super, you know, just this kind of jock bro, full of machismo, who just thinks we can go tearing through the forest necessarily. And
yeah.
So
we'll save a day.
yeah, totally. And watching Robert James Collier, we were like, this guy is going to bring a goodness to Hutch. Like, Hutch cares about his friends, you know, like he actually thinks this mission is good for them in a sense. I mean, he believes they need to pass through something after what they've been through, and to recapture something, and he's completely wrong, and he's way out of his element. So the idea was that we would watch Hutch crack under the pressure, and then and Dom was the hardest to find, Sam Troughton, and we were just in love with Sam Troughton from the get go. And Sam brings not only can Dom be sort of infantile and easy to complain in a sense, but underneath it all, he's got this like really solid moral authority. You know, and it's going to be Dom that Luke is most kind of vulnerable to. It's Dom who he needs to regain the respect with the most, because in his heart of hearts, Dom's the most mature, and he's the one that's going to stick around and make sure they bury Hutch. You know, he's the one that's thinking about the kids. He's the one that is comfortable having an attachment to the other parts of his life, that's, you know, his wife and so on and so forth. And so even though he comes off as an adversary to Luke, I think we always had a great compassion for Dom, even though the movie would eventually lead to his demise. But
yep, but he's got a great character arc in the movie, and there's like, and you're talking about like this catharsis that almost all these characters go through, but Dom is the one that, like you said, he's kind of, I don't want to say infantile, but I mean, he's the one that, you know, he gets hurt. He's the one that slows the group. Hutch decides that, you know, we're going to, you know, barrel through this way and get there a day early. You know, it's going to be an easy shortcut. But Dom's really, I watched the scene twice, a third time actually today, where Dom is just like, when they tie him up, when the monster's coming, he's just tough. You know, I mean, he accepts his fate, but I mean, he's not a blubbering, I don't know. I'm kind of wandering a little bit here, but he had just such a great strength about him. And that actor conveyed it so well. So my hat's off to your casting director, you, the actor. I mean, I thought Dom, the actor, the character, the story was great in his regard, because if it wasn't for his bum knee that he hurt years ago, going down the trail, they would have probably made it to the wherever they were heading. So my hat's off.
One other thing on the knee is just that, my hope, and I don't know if it lands, was that, you kind of underestimate him early on. You think he's making a bigger problem out of something than he is, because that's the position of all the guys.
Yeah, Hutch says that. Hutch says that right away.
Yeah, and then later you got Hutch with a flashlight looking down at the knee, and it's gnarly. Oh. And it's like, maybe this guy is actually in a whole lot of pain, and we've been pretty tragically irresponsible in our respect for him, in a sense. And so you start to see, even though Dom and Luke are at odds, you start to see Dom's strength emerging. And he ultimately, he gets to a place where he's at least accepting of his own death. He's seeing it in his dreams. And we always saw that as being a transition to not so much seeing him change, but seeing his strength emerge. And maybe we had overlooked it earlier on.
One thing that really struck me also, in addition to the great acting in the movie, was the beautiful location. Now, you just said a minute ago, you guys filmed in Romania because Sweden was too expensive. I don't know how all that kind of works out, but how does one go? Does Romania have a film commission? Like, how do you go and scout locations in Romania? And how does all that work? Is it pretty smooth, or?
I mean, there's quite a production scene in Romania, and there's a production services company in Bucharest that had a relationship with the head of production at Imaginarium, and so they had been talking, and we went over there and met up with them, and I had sort of created a document of the dream forest that I wanted for this movie. And I honestly, it was one of those rare moments, and usually making movies is constant heartache and disappointment, because you have an idea of what you want to achieve, and then suddenly you're on set and you have no time, and it's all getting thrown together from the lens, and you're just walking around, just scratching off your babies, just like, all right, so it's not going to quite be that, but what if it's just this? And so this was one of those rare occasions where I totally thought we were going to end up in a rather just a forest I had seen that wasn't super impressive, and they took those pictures and said, "We know what you want," and took us 3.5 hours up into the Carpathian Mountains, and there was a plateau called the Bucej Plateau, and it was absolutely stunning, and it sits at 7,000 feet, so you get this boreal spruce forest up at the top that feels very Northern European, and the canopy's so lush and thick that you get this die-off all the way down the trees, and it just created these like spiny branches, and it's the stuff of horror movies, and we just fell in love, and of course there wasn't, I really lost my mind on the location scouting. And so we were driving all over the plateau and prep every day, every second we had, trying to find a way on our limited schedule to get all of this stuff in. And it becomes a balancing act, because you're like, I really want this look, but I don't even know if we're going to be able to get over here today. Is this even realistic? Have we, are we spending too much time on the imagery, so to speak? And but we were very fortunate. And of course, dropping in a space like that, making a horror movie like this, you pull a lot from the environment.
The woods are a whole nother character. I mean, it's so essential to everything that's going on. And what I loved about them, like you said, these spiny branches and everything. We've seen movies forever, taking place in the woods, but there was something about this, and it was like the naturalness of the fog. It was just breathtaking, and I don't know how much there's drone photography. There's just you just did a great job of showing the enormity of the forest and how dark and how horrible their ordeal is going, and how inescapable these woods look. I mean, it just, and blended with the music too. It's just unbelievable sense of dread, man. Unbelievable. And, but so compelling to watch. I mean, I just was feeling for these characters, and I was immersed in the scenery, the acting, everything, the soundscape, everything of this film.
It was pretty wild up there too, because first of all, it's biting cold. We had to kind of rush into production because winter was coming. And they didn't really know when the first snows would happen, but once it started snowing, it basically wouldn't stop up there. So we were always kind of on edge because we just didn't know. I mean, we had contingency rewrites we would do if suddenly it just got caked in snow. But so we were constantly dealing with like hailstorms, freezing cold weather. The snows did come early, so we had to beat the snow out of trees for continuity. We were lucky on some of the days for the rain because it brought some atmosphere to the table. There was an earthquake. And we had a bear problem. We had a legitimate, actual bear problem, and which we've been warned about. That there were, the biggest. That this was the most populated bear forest in Europe, this part of Europe, and there's these big brown bears. They're basically European grizzlies, and when you feed 100-person crew out there in the woods, they smell the food, and in the middle of the night, so they're around, kind of waiting for us to clear, but we had to hire guards. Like Liam Neeson's job in The Gray.
Oh yeah.
We basically had 4 of those dudes kind of lingering in the dark, just chain smoking with old, rifles on their backs. And so it definitely, you pull from the environment. Like all that stuff shows up in the movie.
I was going to bring up a little bit of The Gray because I just felt just so isolated during the ritual as much as I did watching The Gray. And when you bring up the subject about the bears, I'm going to go off the beaten path a little bit here. But
sure.
Have you seen the movie Grizzly Man, the Werner Herzog documentary?
I only needed to watch it once, but yes.
Oh, God. Yeah, I just watched it probably 2 weeks ago for the first time, and I'm totally. I read for like 2 days straight about Treadwell and all that. So when you're. So like I've watched The Gray, I've watched The Ritual, I watched Grizzly Man, and like and then last week I interviewed for a future episode of the Necronomicast. I interviewed Bob Gimlin from the famous Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film back from 1967. I just talked to him, and so I've had just about enough of the woods. Thank you very much.
I think you have a hiking trip that you have to
No
do.
way, man. You guys have beaten it. You guys all have beaten it out of me. So, that's really interesting. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about filming in the woods because it's a vast woods, and you're in Romania. So those cabin locations, obviously, are those set? Did you do those in LA, or are those done in Romania, or?
Man, that's all the Romanian production designer and his team. Adi Corella, they built those things from scratch.
Oh, for the movie.
And yeah,
great.
Yeah. And knowing full well that we had to do a burn, so you have to build it a certain way for the big one at least. But yeah, I mean, this is not a big movie at all. It's a very small movie, and the amount of production value we got out of that, like what they were able to do, again, greatly exceeded my expectations. But he had a lot of really fabulous ideas about how to design those cabins that were period, and then we would get together and talk about visual ideas. I mean, just got to do a lot of stuff that I maybe thought we wouldn't pull off that actually went in. Little details like making sure there's cracks in the wood, that the way the wood is stacked together, that you can still see the outside. So when you're in the house during a thunderstorm, you can see the lightning through the boards. All that stuff just makes it more visually interesting, and which means you actually got to shoot the dark stuff at night in those houses, which can be uncomfortable for the crew because, you don't want to do all nights for 6 weeks. And so typically when you're going to do interiors, you either do them on a set or you black out all the windows. And we're like, no, we got to do it for real in the woods, in the actual houses that we built. And we got to do it all at night because we want to see the lightning bolts through the wood planks. Those kinds of decisions, I think, paid off. But they built those things from scratch.
Well, it's incredible too. Like there's the scene where they drag Dom upstairs, and there's the shot of you're underneath. You're looking up at the floorboards of the upstairs. So I guess it'd be the ceiling of the lower level, and you hear with your sound design these great thumps, and like they're wailing on them, and then like the dust comes down, like you said, through the cracks, because you could feel it with the sound, and you can see it happening, and so my hat's off to the scenic, the set designer, all that, because it was pretty amazing. We've talked about the acting. The music is fantastic. And that's the guy from Mumford and Sons? Is that right?
No. Mumford and Sons is, he's the alternate universe version of my Ben Lovett. Our Ben Lovett is, I went to the University of Georgia with, and it's one of my oldest buddies. And, he came up doing music. I was doing film stuff. We were all part of a tribe. He scored our first movie, The Signal.
Yeah.
And has gone on to score several different movies since then. He did Sun Don't Shine. He did Synchronicity. And he did Black Rock. He's done a few different movies. And he's incredible and immensely talented. And we've been trying to find the right project for years and years and years, for the universe to align so we could go and do something like this. So he came over in post. He set up a little shop in North London while we were finishing the cut and working the sound design, and just crammed on this and did a really incredible job.
Well, it adds so much to the atmosphere, so my hat's off to him. Now, I also want to talk about, in the time that we have remaining, The Creature.
We can go a little bit longer, too, if you want to, yeah.
Oh, it's up to you, man. I mean, we could talk all night about this creature. Holy cow. So like you said, I don't want to say I didn't want to say right away that it was like a monster movie and whatnot, because there's so much more to it, and just to say, well, it's a monster movie. But holy cow, The Creature. I'd like to talk just a little bit about like the concept of The Creature. Like Adam Nevill, when he came up with the book, I'm sure it was described The Creature in many different ways. But so what was your guys' concept of how did you take from what was on the written page and combine it with whatever Nordic lore, or I'm assuming, or whatever else? Like, how did you come up with that amazing creature? Because it's fantastic. And I'll let you talk about it for a while, because then I got some more questions about CGI, practical effects, because it's incredible, The Creature.
Would love to get into all that. Keith Thompson, who is this incredible designer, concept designer, and artist. I didn't know him. I just found him on the internet and reached out. Said, "Hey, I got a movie. Andy Serkis is involved. Do you want to? What do you think?" And he was into it, and we began a discussion there, and we started collaborating. And so he would just basically sketch out certain designs, and that would present a talking point, and then we would bounce back and forth and talk about it. But the mythology in the last pass of the script, because there's so much mythology in the book to pull from. And I mean, for instance, in the book, it's a she. Her name is Moder.
Really?
And and the woman is her offspring, as well as remnants of what's up in the attic. And her offspring also exists out in the forest. And so there's a lot of stuff that just wouldn't have fit in the movie. And so we were streamlining, and we were bending in a few different directions, and we were kind of we needed to zero in on something that was pretty simple, because otherwise we were going to have a huge exposition dump at the end of the movie. And I mean, part of me would love to make the movie where you just never say anything about what you're dealing with, but the feeling was that there's a certain responsibility to the audience, and a lot of people want something to go for, to build off of in their understanding of what they're dealing with. So we narrowed it down on this idea of a shape-shifting U-tongue, which is conceptually was one of the ways they presented, particularly in this Ironwood clan in Norse mythology, that we thought the personalities that we were reading about of these kind of ancient giants were flexible enough that they could kind of fit inside what our monster was doing. And so we would talk about, Keith and I would talk about, what does it want? What does it do? What is it archetypically? Okay, it's a tyrant. What is its weakness? It is vanity. It requires worship. Mm-hmm. By the way, all this was happening prior to Trump being elected. This was the summer of 2016. So I mean, and really seriously, we had a giggle about it, because we, of course, never thought he would become president. Right. But we were like, it's got a certain vanity. That's what it requires. It's a tyrant. It's an authoritarian in a sense. And so Keith would take these ideas and then go away and come back with something more humanoid. And then I would say, okay, what if we go back more beast? Like, how much can we push the concept of giant, stuff like that? And all the stuff with Neville's imprint kind of in the back of our minds, like not wanting to stray too far. But he has a really great way of, Keith does, of kind of, mutating elements of the human form in a way people don't, you wouldn't normally understand. Because there's a part of your brain that understands the human face and the human shape. And if you manipulate that in a way that you don't understand, you get this eldritch horror abomination kind of feel, which I'm just naturally drawn to. And this was one fresh design that came out of his mind that he passed over, and I lost it. I thought it was incredible. But it's also because, not only is it beastly and animalistic, and does it accomplish the animal god side of what we're doing, but also it's got this, it's adorned with this male torso. It's got the hands where the legs would be. But if you take a really close look at it, the head is actually the same image of the effigy that's up in the attic that they find. So that's built in the imprint of the beast itself.
Okay.
And so it somehow impossibly is adorned with a fleshy man body, and which it sort of presents to Luke when it's right before it goes into its prayer stance. But all that stuff came from Keith and talking to Keith and just different ideas that he had.
Well, what's cool about it too is it's such an impossible creature, and I don't know what your budget is, but maybe it was the way it was filmed, because a lot of it was filmed with it in the background, obscured by trees and whatnot. The neat scene of the cabin or the house that's on fire, the creature's in front of it, so it's kind of obscured by smoke and flame. But I'm just wondering, it's like seamless practical effects with CGI. So many times you see things and you can tell it's fake or it's digital and whatnot. But I mean, I was so impressed. I was watching it a couple times, how it just popped off the screen, and it just, I mean, when the monster looks real, David, it makes you more scared. You know what I'm saying?
Totally.
How did you, I don't know if you want to give away trade secrets, but is there a marriage? How much of a marriage there is with CGI and practical effects?
No, I'd love to talk about it. Cause I get to talk about all my wonderful collaborators. Basically, I guess it's about half and half. We built the head. So the head existed practically. And Josh and Sierra Russell of Russell Effects, who worked on Southbound with me, built all this stuff with their team and then brought it over to Romania. And the head has a human performer inside of it, and a stunt performer. And she wears these big, these prosthetic sleeves to play the arms. And the way she would fit into the head, her actual head would come out of what we called the cowl, which is where the face of the monster exists, the two eyes in darkness,
right?
Which is basically the crotch of the adorned man body. And so she would get in this thing, and we would sometimes have her on the top of a jib arm, and sometimes we had her attached to wire work. And so that was all set up in the forest, and a lot of the stuff where Rafe is being grabbed, being spun around, being lifted up, where it's interacting with him, a lot of those glimpses are us positioning camera in and around the adorned head, or the prosthetic head. And then we would just paint the stunt performer's actual head out in those moments. And that's just a blast to shoot, because it's one of those things that, of course, it's tight production. You don't have enough time to test it. You got a handful of really great minds working together, trying to figure out how to make this thing real, and it all comes together on the night. Suddenly you've got, a giant puppeted Norse animal god head up on a jib arm with a person inside of it, and it's raining, and it's 3:30 in the morning, and it's attacking Rafe, and you're just trying to find a camera angle that sells it. And for how long, it's like, I think we can get 3 seconds out of this with that kind of motion. And, and there's 5 guys operating the back of the jib arm, and the way they maneuver that thing gives it personality, and suddenly everyone's a puppeteer. And that stuff's just, it's just extraordinary and a bit unpredictable. then it's combining that with all the CGI work, which was our VFX supervisor Ben White knows the shit, and I loved it because he showed up week 4 of the production. We were well into nights at that point, and everybody's lost their mind a little bit. He shows up full of energy, and we've already been through hell and back. And so he rejuvenated us in a sense. But he had his assistant, and they're running around the woods dropping tracking markers on trees, so we can pull off all these VFX shots that we storyboarded.
Oh my god!
But yeah, the goal is always to integrate as much practical as we could. There were moments I wanted to fuse practical and digital a bit more, but from a cost perspective, it didn't make sense, And then you've got these kind of complex orchestrations where it's like Rafe running through the convenience store at the end. That's obviously like a digital monster running behind the shelves, but when it hits the shelf, that's a live shelf coming down. And the reset on that shelf is 45 minutes. And we don't have 45 minutes, so we have one chance. So you've got a camera on a wire with Rafe running that has to be in sync with Rafe running, that has to hit all these different tracking markers, and we have to pull this thing down at the exact time, and you've got one chance, Those were the kinds of orchestrations we found ourselves in with this. And, yeah, that's about as far for a while I want to go in giant monster mechanics.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit when you were talking. I kept thinking about, I was reading the Jaws log by Carl Gottlieb. It's famous. It's of lore now of the shark not working and whatnot, and filming out on the ocean. I mean, I'm sure filming out in the woods of Romania with all this going on, I'm sure you can sympathize with that. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up, I'm glad you brought up the whole integration of the liquor store robbery in the woods, because I thought that was incredible, because it's bringing his the character of Luke's his regret, his grief, everything about Robert, and it brings it into the here and now, and he's haunted by whatever's stalking him out in the woods, but he's also haunted by what happened 6 months ago. And I thought the whole integration of the liquor store, the modern convenience store, with the remote woods was really unique. I thought that was incredible.
Rad, yeah, totally. It was, that really came from Joe Barton's interpretation. In the book, they're having nightmare kind of glimpses of the monster, amongst other things. It's also the nature of Neville's prose. It's kind of abstract what their nightmares are. Sometimes he's just describing these feelings of panic and anxiety. And but Joe smartly took that and used those nightmares as a way to sort of deal with backstory mechanics around the characters. And so I think in Joe's draft that I first read, it was about an incident at an office building. So it was more like cubicles appearing in the forest. And we eventually ended on the convenience store. It was like, okay, so it's going to be these shelves and these fluorescent lights kind of appearing in darkness. But there's something about Joe's writing in particular that differed from Neville's book, which was he just had there was a flavor to it. There's humor to his banter, and there was a kind of go for brokeness in some of the imagery that he was creating that, to me, kind of it hinted at a slightly Evil Dead flavor. Mm-hmm. And so the question was, can we have fun with like grown up male shit, in the woods? Can we do fun character stuff? Can we explore that stuff in a mature way, but also have this, kind of B-movie flair to the way we handle the horror in a sense? And that was a question that I had going into it totally. And and there's a point where you just go, fuck it, let's go for it. And that was kind of the spirit of this, all the way down to like, we're going to show the monster. We're not going to show the monster. It's like, well, I really respect withholding in a lot of movies, and I think you can really maintain a certain somber core kind of a vibe with that. But this is a fuck you. We're going to show the monster movie. Like, it's just what this is. We're going to go for it. And it's ancient Norse Viking mythology. There's something sort of bold about the idea. But in the convenience stores in particular, in the nightmare visions, it worked into that in that sense where we're like, okay, we're going to build them practically. These are going to be almost Gondry-esque, visions in the woods, and they're going to exist in material. They're not going to use like flashy editing tricks to kind of cut away to visions and stuff like that. Like it's going to integrate quite literally into the forest. And, like I said, a lot of that went back to Joe, but it was really just a tonal inspiration, and we ran with it.
Well, I'm glad you did, because it's one of those things like, well, okay, 4 guys go out into the woods and they venture off the path, and you're thinking, all right, well, like for me, one of the first horror movies I ever saw was American Werewolf in London. Scared the shit out of me back in the 80s. They kind of venture off the path of the moors, and but what I like is that you guys took this trope of, going someplace where you're not supposed to go, off the beaten path, fish out of water, man out of his element, and yet it's fresh, it's unique. I love the banter, the acting, the music, the creature, everything about it. You guys turned it on its head and came up with a movie that obviously the execs over at Netflix saw something in. So you guys made this movie, and then was it the intent to kind of, what was the intent? Like a wide release or a smaller release or a European release? What was that? And before Netflix jumped in?
Well, there was always E1 co-financed, and they have distribution models. So there was always that they were going to put it out in the UK, and it worked for their numbers on that level alone. So we were sort of guaranteed, an outlet there. And I think, and the hope obviously was that it would have a life beyond that. That this was something that could translate to the States. But not every British horror movie does necessarily. There's a little bit of a culture gap, not much. Obviously there's super successes in that regard that date back, but The Descent being the major landmark that, there are certain parallels in the way that's structured into this film as well. But yeah, so we knew we wanted to premiere at Toronto at midnight, and Peter Koblowski responded to it. So we were very fortunate that he put it in his lineup for his first year running Midnight Madness, and we had a great experience there, and came out of that, and Netflix made an offer, and we had, there's always the question of, do you want to go, would we prefer to go theatrical in the States? Sometimes, there's something immersive about this that I love the idea of people seeing it in a movie theater, but when you look at Netflix's reach and the way these movies are kind of delivered to the audience via streaming, the expectation's a little bit different. It's a different way to receive it. And the thinking for me was like, there's almost perhaps a little bit more flexibility in the tonal nuance in this movie, because it's such a strange kind of cocktail of flavors that maybe has a little bit more license to work on streaming, whereas like American theatrical market is very narrow in terms of, what you can do with horror. And unless you have like a breakout, like super art house hit like The Witch or It Follows or something like that. And so yeah, it made sense to us, and it's been really great since Friday, just kind of hearing from people, their responses and their takes, and I've enjoyed it.
Well, I'm glad that it was preserved in the way it was made and intended, in terms of like with the European cast. I liked seeing that. I enjoyed seeing actors that I haven't really necessarily seen before. Although Luke's actor, what was his name again? Luke's
Ray Spall.
Yeah, he was like in Prometheus. I saw, right? He was in some things like that.
Yeah, and he's I think he's new Jurassic Park movie.
Yeah. So
I think we're gonna see a lot more of Rafe, I think.
Well, what I appreciate is seeing some actors that I'm not necessarily familiar with, rather than making an American version with Ed Helms and Bradley Cooper, or making it slapstick or something like that. I like seeing different faces on the screen, because those guys brought it, absolutely. So when Netflix comes in and they buy it, and then they get the rights to it, or they just get to re-release it, or is that how that works? Yeah,
they bought it, and basically it's it belongs to Netflix for world distribution. E1 held on to UK and Ireland, I believe.
Okay. Well, cool, man. I from the guy sitting in Omaha, I'm glad that Netflix does invest in different things, because I've seen some different films that I probably wouldn't have seen before brought to my home because of Netflix and other streaming services. So the paradigm, the shift is happening in Hollywood, where there's the great theatrical releases, of course, but it's nice to see like such an investment, not only in movies that I probably wouldn't be able to have brought to Omaha, but also in the world of television too, because there's so many things that are brought to my home that I so enjoy and that are so artistic and so wonderful that I probably wouldn't have the chance to see 10 years ago.
Totally. I mean, that's the hope, isn't it? Is that the streaming services will continue to take, creative risks in the movies that they support and stuff.
Gosh,
Absolutely.
That's the thing, man. Creative risks. I mean, when so many people in Hollywood are so scared to make a movie or to finance something or greenlight something because they don't know how it's going to react with the shareholders. And I know money's always the thing, but when there's these risks that are being taken and they're able to be taken by a company such as Netflix or anything like that, I think it's good for the artists. I think it's good for the people that enjoy the shows. It's good all the way around. So, David, as our time dwindles down here, what's going on? What's going on in the future? You got some projects that you're working on that I don't know if you can necessarily tease us, but I mean, you showed such great promise with your anthology work, and now your first full length is under your belt, man. I can't wait to see what you've got coming up next.
Thanks, man. I'm bummed. There's nothing I can really talk about yet, but there are a few different things in the works, and I don't know what will come to life first. But I'm just happy to have the opportunity to do this stuff, and I am certainly not fading from horror. I want to keep doing new, fresh horror stuff. I think they're all original ideas, which is fun. It's something I'm really excited about.
Well, you've got an eye for it. You've got a definite talent for it, and I hope. I mean, you could do whatever you want. If you want to do a rom-com next, great, man. Call Matthew McConaughey. I'm sure he'll like to work with you. But for us that enjoy the horror film and like squirming in our seats a little bit, I think you're a godsend, and I'm so excited that you've been a part of our show, not only in the past with Southbound, but now with The Ritual. It's just great to have one of the fresh people in Hollywood that are making interesting shows in the genre that we enjoy come and talk to us and share their insight and their vision with everybody else that listens, man.
Thanks, man. That's super encouraging, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm glad we connected many years ago, and let's just make our own ritual of this, Like, if the universe lets me make a movie, I'll always come talk to you.
Right on, man. Well, we really appreciate it, and like I said, appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, especially with the movie just coming out. I loved it. Love to talk to you again, and we'll just keep it professional, and we'll keep in touch. So we've had on the show the great David Bruckner. Just want to thank him again. And on behalf of our co-hosts, Wayne, Lori, Zip, and Doug, this is Brian. Thank you for listening to the Necronomicast. Kapow.
Done. Fuck yeah, man. That was great.
You've been listening to the Necronomicast, a podcast hosted by a bunch of blood bags and produced by Brian Corey and Wayne Brecky. For show notes and other interesting information, go to the show page at necronomicast.com. And until next time, find something better to do with your time.